My name is Richard Watkins, and I used to be principal horn of the Philharmonia some years ago. Although since leaving the orchestra, I've been privileged and honoured to come back and play the several commissions by Colin Matthews' Horn Concerto and Tansy Davis' Forest, which was written for four horns and orchestra. They were both with esa-pekka Salonen. But I'm particularly delighted to be coming back to play with the orchestra again with my friend and colleague Mark-Anthony Turnage, who's been, we've discussed and talked about a piece for some time, and so I'm delighted to be coming back to play this Towards Alba with the Philharmonia and esa-pekka Salonen. So Mark, I wanted to ask you, how did this piece come about? I know we've actually collaborated in several guises, the Nash Ensemble, and I also remember particularly being terribly thrilled when I discovered that one of your the movements in your cello concerto was actually entitled Prayer for a Great Man, and it was a duet for horn and cello. It was written for Paul Watkins, who I should just elaborate.
No relation.
We're not actually related,
no.
but I was thrilled to discover this piece, and we actually, Paul and I subsequently recorded that.
Yes,
so that was beautiful. Beautiful piece.
I suppose I've always wanted to write a horn concerto, but I just thought, I don't know if I had the technique at that time. It's one of those instruments that I knew quite a lot of horn concertos. I was very influenced by the Strauss, knew the Strauss concertos, and I also Oliver Nussen's concerto. Which he wrote for Barry Tuckwell, and but I also, there's things in my background like there's the Britain Serenade, which I love. So I had this idea that I wanted to do something, but I wasn't sure when I was going to do it. And then when you asked me, I think you asked me quite a few years ago.
Sure, yes.
But it was but once when players ask me about pieces, they sort of percolate in my mind. And I think about them for years. Sometimes I do them straight away.
Straight away, yes.
But in this case, I sort of thought about it, and I thought we'd have to find the right slot. And then, of course, it was a lovely combination because, of course, esa-pekka being a ex-horn player.
Yes, of course.
There's a sort of like a real reason. It's quite funny because I've written two concertos for trumpet for Hawk and Hardenberg with Andrus Nelsons, who's also an ex-trumpet player.
I see. So there's
a nice little
symmetry
thing with conductors who played an instrument quite often like working with solos, from their old instruments. So, so that's how it came about, really.
Right. And were there any characteristics of the horn that you particularly wanted to embrace?
Well, I suppose the sort of lyrical element. I mean, I know it's not just that, but again, I'm a huge Brahms fan. So I was very aware of, for instance, the Second Piano Concerto and also things in the symphonies. But that sort of horn call type thing that was part of me growing up. I grew up with Brahms particularly, and the symphonies and all the horn parts in that, and then Bruckner as well. So there was lots of sort of Germanic tradition that I loved. Whether it comes out in this piece, I don't know, but there's that lyrical quality that I probably favour, and that's why the middle movement's very, very lyrical.
Very lyrical, yes.
So that was sort of very much in my background when I was writing the piece.
Right. I mean, looking at the part, exactly that. I mean, you see, as a player, you see all the lovely lines, which obviously highlights all that lyricism.
Yes.
But I mean, that's very important. And to me, that's really what the horn does best, as opposed to sometimes with some of your colleagues who
mentioning no names.
No mentioning names, who try and write the most difficult piece, and technically and virtuosically, it's sometimes sort of unplayable. But I mean, this obviously
it's not unplayable.
It's tricky, but
no.
But it to me, it seems to fit the horn like a glove. It's
well, I hope
lovely.
I mean, I do care, and I want. It's not like I just want all players to love me, but I think the idea of doing something that just sounds not idiomatic for the instrument is, I mean, I teach composition, and if I had a student come in with one of those pieces you sort of mentioned, then I want, to tidy it up or to realise because acoustically, what's the point of doing something that works against the instrument? I mean, I know you've got to be adventurous. I'm not saying you should just I should have written a piece with just long lyrical lines that,
No.
But at the same time, I think it has to be idiomatic and it has to sound, and so I work quite carefully with that. Actually, I did have another piece. I did write a piece for four horns, like Tansy.
Of course you did, yes.
Called Four Horn Fandango, which the BBC Symphony did. So I did have a sort of, not a dry run, but of course it was four players. But also because that was influenced very much by the Schumann concerto,
great role model,
which I
yes,
loved.
yes.
Loved.
Yes,
so,
of course.
so again, that's
it's always embedded in
my
your mind.
background.
Yeah,
It's very much sort of. I grew up with all this sort of music, but usually 19th century, not so much the modern, apart from the Strauss.
Yeah.
Which I sort of got to know again when I was writing this. I sort of checked things out.
Yeah.
Although sometimes you've got to be careful with that because some pieces can be very overwhelming and you don't want to be over influenced. But Ollie Nusson, who was my teacher and great friend, I was around a lot when he wrote that piece and the recording and everything with Barry Tuttle. So I think that's very much in the background, and I knew Colin Matthews' piece as well. So so it was just sort of part of a tradition in a way.
And you mentioned the Britain Serenade.
Yes.
Of course, which the poetry is set basically in a nocturnal setting.
Yes.
And I just wanted to ask you about the poetry
yes.
inspired by this, which is not actually nocturnal, but it's actually all about sunrise, isn't it?
It's all about sunrise,
Towards Alba.
A lot of my pieces are based on poems, and I actually set the line, but then take away the words. So you'll find, but I'm not consistent. So I keep, and sometimes I keep quiet about it. I don't say this is based. This one has the title is Aborn, so it is based on the, and I don't, that'll be in the program that it's based on the Philip Larkin. But what I do is so I probably set maybe the first 3 or 4 lines and sort of get bored. I mean, bored is not the right word, but I sort of get distracted and go away from the poem. But it means that the essence of the poem is in that movement. Yes. And so I went through that. So that really influenced the tone and the atmosphere of that movement. And the last movement is a John Donne poem. I think the original is called Rising Sun, but this is I thought that sounds too much like a pub, so I didn't want to give it that title. So it's called Unruly Sun, which is one of the lines. Yes. And so again, I do actually. It's that sort of quite similar to in subject matter about lovers and dawn and everything, but I actually set it slightly. I set some of the lines, but then again I sort of go off on a tangent.
I mean, the last movement is very kind of upbeat, isn't it?
Yeah,
and it's very sort of positive, which I think is reflected in the.
I think so. Poetry. Yeah, I think so. I love John Donne. So this, in a way, set off a new sort of thing for me. Yes. So eventually, I actually started writing for tenor and baritone, and actually mezzo as well. I've done quite a few song cycles since this piece, but this sort of set the train going. I don't expect you to sing at this, by the way. There's no singing through your instrument.
No. That's a relief.
Yeah, as you know. But,
that always scares me. But so the fact that the Britain Serenade is in the concert as well. Yeah. Were you aware of that, or was the orchestra keen on?
I think so. I think it was a nice.
But it seems an incredible stroke of good luck to have some great poetry all through the theme running through the whole concert. It's a really Horn-themed program. The first piece is Der Freischütz, Weber der Freischütz. Of course. Then with the our piece, and then the Britain Serenade, and then the concert finishes with Till Eulenspiegel.
Yeah, Strauss, which is pretty horn-based as well. That's another piece that I grew up with.
Me too.
So the Der Freischütz, and so all those pieces were part of my sort of like knowing about the horn over the years.
Yes, exactly. yes. So I think I'll probably in Till Eulenspiegel I'll be toasting my colleagues with a glass of something refreshing. By that
you're not playing in that. You'll be
no.
Yeah, you're in the bar.
I'll be enjoying it.
The other thing that happens quite often with soloists, I've noticed this, there's a bit of a shock when you first hear the orchestra.
Yes, of course, exactly.
And actually that goes for solo. I mean, in fact, it's the same thing with talking about Britain and talking about Alan Clayton. I think when you first heard the orchestra recently, I think there's always that adjustment because you have to, you're part of this sound world where you don't, if you've only got a piano version or you just got your solo version, you don't quite know
what to expect.
But of course, these days, I mean, I did give you a Sibelius version,
that's really helpful,
which probably is not obviously the fact, it's much richer when you hear it with the orchestra.
Of course,
clearly, but because it's not computerized. But at the same time, it will give you more of an idea of what's
incredibly helpful.
You.
Yes. So it prepares you for the orchestral rehearsal.
So maybe just play the opening and see. fantastic. Yeah, that's great. The thing is now, you know, when we first talked, it was slightly different, but now you know, it has a sort of jaunty thing. But what we don't get is, of course, is the orchestra are playing off it's a lot of counterpoint. I mean, they're taking up your lines. Right. What will be interesting is that your phrasing, the way you play it, will probably influence
so there'll be
the way they play when they do the first rehearsal. When esa-pekka does it, they'll have,
hear
you know,
it and react.
Yeah. But that's exactly as I.
So that's a kind of slightly sort of punchy feel.
Punchy, because the other thing I'm always scared, because I always find it easier to write slower lyrical music than I do.
Oh, right, really?
I do, yeah. I have to work much harder at the punchy stuff. Is that I want to make sure it has, you know, it has that sort of lighter quality. I mean, this might sound a bit technical, but I write a lot of articulation. I do it because I want the syncopation quite often, and I want it. You know, I think that if it's too if it's under-articulated, and I have this thing with students where they write very plain, you know, I mean, you know, it's okay in Bach.
So it can be a bit smooth, or
and well, the thing is, I think
the bite.
I think it loses the bite, but at the same time, if it's too aggressive and not light enough, and I think this is quite light, which is what I think people see accents, and so in a way, it's more like a jazz thing. It's more like the articulation and phrasing, because I think a lot of modern music, people just go, right, I'm just going to be aggressive. And not musical in a weird sort of way, because I think people just think, oh, well, we won't play it like Bruckner or Strauss. We'll play it like, you know, I don't know. I'm not naming any names again, but sometimes I have to work with players to say, look, please play it more. Well, actually, if you're going to be honest, more romantically.
Right, I see.
And and play it lighter.
Yes.
Even though I've written all this bloody articulation, it's a bit of a disease is the wrong word, but it's a thing that sort of comes from second Viennese school, Berg and Schoenberg, where there's a lot of articulation, a lot of dynamics, and I always feel that if it's too bare,
it can get overloaded.
But I think it can overload. And having worked with quite a few jazz musicians over the years that don't need so much detail, I'm trying to sort of rein back on it, but that's exactly as I want it. But you know, the final version will have the orchestra bouncing off you.
And the character, I mean, I remember looking up about Alba. It's almost in medieval times. It was a sort of a call to the end of the night and the beginning of the day, but with also a slightly sort of mischievous sort of being a sort of love song, a love poem,
that's true.
And to actually sort of clandestine sort of lovers to kind of
I didn't know about that.
Scarper quickly or something. So I mean, I got the feeling there was that sort of slight element of, as you said, Tilonspiegel and the lightness which we over the second part.
A bit later on, you got the triplet thing as well. That's
exactly,
coming
which
up,
we discovered. Shall I play that?
Yeah, play a little bit of that. Yeah. This is sort of like obviously more sort of like horn call, but actually what I realise, and again it's something in the background, it is something that I'm increasingly aware of, although not always consciously, is Tippett. And of course I grew up again with the sonata for four horns.
Yeah, of course.
You know, you can't hear that now, but the orchestral horns bounce off you here particularly.
Exactly.
And I think that maybe there's an echo of that, but that triplet sort of like horn call type thing is
the Tippett. Which manifests in different.
And it's all that lovely,
it goes very
bouncing.
Beautiful. And
it's counterpoint. I mean, I like,
you
know, I think it's very important. Again, I talk to my students about that. You've got to, you know, counterpoint is very important.
Right,
you know,
absolutely.
But there's a lot of that in here. So that's sort of, but that's that horn call thing that I exploit, and I think it comes back in the last movement, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And you say horn call, this particular section, isn't that with just the orchestral horns playing?
Yes.
It's a lovely touch. So
so we'll be
that'll be just 5
and you'll know all your mates.
Yes.
The second movement is the Philip Larkin, and this is.
So it's slightly more. I mean, it's a poem. Am I right in thinking it's more about his mortality?
It's regret. It's about because it was a very late poem.
Right at the end of his life.
Right at the end of his life, and you know, and his poetry wasn't the happiest.
No.
He was a pretty sort of solitary sod, really. Right. I mean, living in Hull and working at a library. I mean, but I love his poetry, and I've always loved it. I mean, it's slightly sort of misanthropic. and sort of miserable, which I don't think I'm missing for it, but that sort of melancholy is quite important in his poems, and I think this is it's a very beautiful late poem. And I think I sort of was inspired by it, started off, and then as I said, I went off on a tangent. So it's just really the feel. It's not really. It is there, and you probably could analyse it in that way. But I think it's that lyrical, expansive thing. So maybe if you could play the opening.
For me, sure.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. The thing is that this is like a long line, but in the orchestra, it's quite string based, especially at that point.
Yes.
And you've got these sort of maybe sort of lyrical lines in the strings, and particularly violas, and so I think that that's sort of coming. You see, you can't tell from just the solo line, but that's what's going on.
Yes. I mean, it strikes me that this figure. It gives a very sort of moody quality.
Yeah.
So I mean, I guess that you like it to be fairly flexible. Those
definitely
quintuplets, they don't
almost,
need to be.
No, almost rubato.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
As you say, there's just sort of like a string pad.
Yeah. I think so, and I think you sort of, and it might be Richard actually that I'm just looking at that now. It's difficult to tell when I've not got the orchestra underneath, but a couple of the ends of phrases I might get you to play slightly longer when I hear it acoustic, in the whole thing. That happens quite a bit with solo. I did that with the trumpet, with particularly brass things, where like with the trumpet, where I think that I want the line to go on slightly longer.
Just sustain the line.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I mean, just hearing it then, it's hard to tell. But I want to give you breath, so you can have somewhere to breathe.
Yeah, we always like that.
but I think it would be.
There's something magical about the sound of a brass instrument just sustaining and dying away.
Yes, so I might do. There might be a few little tiny changes.
And then of course later on it gets a little more emotional, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose
this section 46 where the tempo moves on a little bit.
Yes, absolutely.
And then there's the very dramatic bits.
Well, you mean instrumental bit? Oh,
so
you mean here?
Bar 60.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, it's quite an emotional thing, I suppose. But that's what the horn can do really well, like really ping it out. I mean, that section seems to me almost the sort of the dynamic climax of the whole work.
And it's quite high. That's the other thing that I'm quite scared. It's actually same about it's sort of quite vocal in a way, because I think quite a few solo things I've seen where everything's just so high that you've got there's no sort of scope.
And that element of trying to write for the highest note possible.
Yeah.
But I mean, this feels. I mean, it kind of feels like a kind of thrilling sound in that register.
But if the whole piece was that,
of course,
then I think it's so you have to, like, as a composer, I think you like balance that out a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is the John Donne.
Yes.
And it opens the actual. Yeah, this is, I was quite worried about this because I wanted, again, this is talk about low horn. I wanted to sort of start, and I also, you know, wanted to start it with the horn, but also just the sort of full range as well.
Yes. I mean, there's a connection towards the end of the second movement, isn't there? It's quite similar writing, but that's in a different. This is in a slightly more upbeat way. Would that be?
Oh, I see. I mean, there's it's sort of an overlap. It's a sort of I suppose you're trying to look for unity, but this is more extrovert. I think. It's more lyrical in the first.
I'll give it a go.
Second movement. Yeah. So there's sort of very sort of like the whole range. So I think, you know, this is quite, I suppose it's quite jazzy, this movement.
I mean,
maybe play a
some
jazzy
great
bit.
I mean, it's great.
Yeah, it's counterpoint basically.
Yes.
I think counterpoint's underrated these days. You know,
Yeah.
But I you know, worked on that. I remember, even funny enough, talking about Ollie Nussin again. He always said, you know, composers should learn. He learned 16th century counterpoint with his teacher John Lambert, who was also my teacher. And we you know, counterpoint was very important. And I think it becomes more, you know, even more important to me. But the idea of canons and, you know, when you've got a horn, I mean, it happens in the first movement when you're playing off the solo, the orchestral horns.
Yes.
But in this as well, the orchestra sort of just sort of riffs in a way off you, and that's that jazzy
dialogue
thing. It's a dialogue. Yeah.
And the bit at the end, when I first saw that, I thought, crikey, this is really hard. It'll all be completely covered up by the orchestra, and of course it's just the horn alone at the end.
Oh yeah.
But,
Yes.
I mean, that's a sort of culmination of everything, isn't it?
It is really,
incredibly
effective.
effective.
I suppose it's sort of the cadenza, although it's very short.
Yeah.
And I, you know, that there was always that problem a little bit, and I've had this with quite a few pieces, especially concertos, is whether you have a cadenza or you don't have a cadenza. And so, do you want to play that?
Yeah,
the
sure.
last bit, yeah. So that's a cadenza in a way, and I think you know, in a way, you could go the other way. I could have written like, you know, a minute and a half, and I thought, well, actually for this piece, because it's quite succinct, I probably finished earlier than that, and then I thought, no, I need something where the horn is at least
it works very well
on its own, but not for too long, because the dramatic effect to it would be spoilt by just going on, and because I do like the idea of you being just at certain points just alone. on your own, or with very little, because I think that, you know. I think you need to make it, you know, like so that it is idiomatic or challenging, but not, you know, not it's ridiculous. Like
you don't want to make it sound Olympic, do you?
No, not really.
No, exactly.
And again, if you know, and I wrote this trombone concerto for Christian Lindbergh, which is so impossible. I don't think any of that. I mean, he says the play's coming up, but you know, so you've got to get the balance.
No. Yeah. Well, this seems brilliant. I mean, it seems challenging, but I mean, you seem to have ticked all the boxes perfectly with
maybe
all
I should have learned the horn.
The lyrical. Yeah. Perhaps that's
hard. I can't do it now though. Imagine.
Barry Tucknell described it as like driving a car on black ice, you know, playing the horn. So
it's really.
So I mean, they're always going to be challenging moments. But you know, this seems absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm really excited looking forward to January.
Thank you.
Should be great
me
fun.
too.
Great fun.
Thank you.